Welcome back to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and in today's episode, we remember the Armenian genocide that took place during World War I in 1915 to 1916. It was the first genocide of the 20th century. Ralph Lemkin, who defined genocide and helped establish that as an international norm, looked to both the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide to define the unique crime of genocide. And in a world that throws the term around very carelessly, it has lost the gravity of its meaning. We have forgotten the faces of real victims of genocide. We see the term thrown around today in the Western media to demonize or characterize an idea or an army or a war that we might not agree with, but that is not the definition of genocide. And today, in remembering the Armenian genocide, we can look to the current conflict in Artsakh, which is taking place, which has ethnically cleansed indigenous Armenians from their ancestral homeland. Armenia was the first Christian nation back, I believe, in 303 AD. It is home to some of the most ancient and oldest and well-preserved Christian communities in the Middle East and in the Near East in Asia. Today, I speak with Jackie, who works on the docuseries called Faces of Persecution, to discuss the modern plight of ethnic Armenians, which again is the continuation of the Armenian genocide back at the hands of the Ottoman Turks 1915. So today is not the Ottoman Turks, but it is Azerbaijan and Turkey. The Ottoman Empire fell at the end of World War I, and then the Soviet Union came in. And today, the modern nation states of Turkey and Azerbaijan are enacting an ethnic cleansing and genocide to reinstate an idealized and Islamized idea of Turkish nationalism, which must erase and eradicate the indigenous Christians living in Artsakh today. The Faces of Persecution docuseries doesn't look at just the Armenian genocide, but looks at the genocide of the Yazidis at the hands of ISIS, as well as the Christian persecution of Nigerians at the hands of Islamists in Nigeria. But we hear news of Christian persecution often, although it's not proliferated through Western media. Not too long ago, I believe 2 months ago, 70 Christians were beheaded in the Congo at the hands of Islamists as well. There is a through line and a common narrative that we can take away, both with the perpetrators, many of them being Islamist or radicalized by Islamic national ideologies that do not tolerate Christian pluralism or indigenous Christians. And the persecuted share very similar stories of being systematically targeted by either a regime, a nation state, or a state sponsor of terrorism, having their food supplies cut off, having their religious sites, their ancient religious sites, destroyed or ruined. And there's many more commonalities that Jackie is going to walk us through today. So again, in light of remembering the Armenian genocide that took place during World War I, we look to modern examples of genocide motivated by Islamist ideologies in the Middle East, stories that the Western media either ignores because it's inconvenient to established narratives or complex networks of alliances, or simply because it's not trending in the West and therefore they don't talk about it. So we're going to look at some of those stories today. I encourage you to look at the conflict between ISIS and the persecution of the Yazidis of Armenia and also those Christians in Nigeria. We don't talk about the Congo in today's episode, but as well in the Congo, in a rising woke right environment we live in here in the West, and the outrage for some Christian minority groups in the Middle East, but not for others, is also a really dangerous place because the selective moral outrage ignores those who are being persecuted today. So this is the story of our Christian brothers and sisters in Armenia, in Nigeria, and I hope you enjoy. Jackie Abramian, welcome to the Philos Project podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Dominique. Good to be here.
If you could just give us a little bit of background. I know today we'll be talking about the Faces of Persecution docuseries that you have been working on, which is kind of perfect timing with Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day, which we'll be talking about this week at the Philos Project. So what is the docuseries? What brought you to this line of work?
So, as a professional, I'm a corporate communications consultant for technology companies. And I have also worked with Barat Maronian, who is the multi-award winning director and producer of Faces of Persecution. I work as writer slash producer with Barat Maronian on this series that is basically a docuseries that is educational, and it's to promote and amplify the faces of the people who are persecuted, because the media, as you know, lacks to give in-depth coverage to such persecutions. So we want to not only dive into these conflicts, but also put faces. So we put people who survive persecutions to tell their stories, their firsthand stories, as well as experts, historians, religious experts to give a backdrop to the conflict that has, whether it's the Yazidi genocide, that is one of our episodes that we just released on the 10th anniversary of the Yazidi genocide, which was last August, perpetrated by ISIS, or if it's the Artsakh ethnic cleansing, which is the next episode soon to be released, or the case of the Kaduna, Nigeria Christians who are being attacked by Fulanis who have become extreme Islamists. So we want to put a face to all this. We want to do a deep dive, but also draw parallels across these stories that are thousands of miles away, but seem to share the pains of wars and conflicts and war crimes that are perpetrated by state-run powers, while other powers basically stand by to witness and not take any action.
Mm. And what are some of those parallels that you've seen just writing and working on the docuseries between the persecution and these three people groups specifically, but I'm sure that they apply to other Christian minorities across the Near East?
So some of the parallels are that it is, state-run, state-sponsored destruction. It comes from, just like in Artsakh, isolation, starvation, war crimes, and then erasure of religious and cultural heritage sites, which in violates every international law, rule of law, war crimes, you name it. But it also, also Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, but it also provides the backdrop that when livelihoods, natural resources, religious sites that anchor the residents to their ancestral homes or homelands, when these are destroyed, you're in a way destroying traditions, identity as a whole, and also sever the population's ties to those lands and their return. Because when you erase the cultural heritage sites that, in the case of Artsakh or the Yazidi population, that are older than a millennia, then you are basically saying such people were never here. These are the anchoring kind of points that bring the ancestral homeland to its residents, so that when you're doing that, it's genocide, ethnocide, ethnic cleansing that basically forcefully displaces people out of their ancestral homelands.
I think you make a great point, because in Artsakh, they being Azerbaijan, has an immense amount of historic and ancient Christian sites. And as you astutely point out, this is not just to displace the ethnic Armenians living there, but to remove them entirely from their connection to the land. In light of it being Armenian Genocide Awareness Day, and this modern story of Armenian persecution in Artsakh, it's kind of the continuation of that story just over 100 years later. Could you give the viewer just a little bit of background to the modern context of what is happening in Artsakh and Azerbaijan's role?
Well, it's kind of an extension of the Ottoman Empire's genocide and erasure of cultural heritage sites of the Armenians. 1.5 million Armenians being perished throughout the Ottoman Empire. And one by one, their cultural churches, sites being demolished so that there is no such thing. In fact, so many of the houses that are in those areas today have remnants of church stones with inscriptions because these destructions were just scattered. The current residents, or the ones who kind of took the place of the Armenians, basically used those stones to build their homes. So the remnants is there, but it's not standing. So Azerbaijan kind of continued its plundering of Artsakh, which is the ancestral homeland of indigenous Christian Armenians. And now, in a very systematic way, they are destroying churches, cultural sites, and in fact, they're proudly videotaping and showing it on social media as though, I mean, they don't realize that they are incriminating themselves, but they are proud that they're doing this because somehow they think they're cleansing themselves of the infidels that live there. It's a sad fact because it's also setting a precedent for other powers to do similar things when foreign powers basically stand by, give a lot of rhetoric, a lot of lip service, including the US. As you know, the USAID administrator, Samantha Power, who actually wrote the book on genocide, was again and again told about the Artsakh situation and never visited, even though it was blockaded. Yes, but she did visit Armenia on the day that 120,000 indigenous Christian Armenians were forcibly displaced and became refugees. So she appeared on the border of Armenia and Artsakh to say, I'm here. But by then, things have been done. And even to this day, Azerbaijan is not being held accountable for what they're doing, continue to do.
And I know in our correspondence before hopping on this call, we talked briefly about the Vatican and Azerbaijan. I know that the Pope has also gone to Armenia. But how does this complicate the international recognition and kind of nod to the apathy in the West, or at least the appeasement of Azerbaijan? I think it's a conflict not many people talk about because it's not convenient to talk about. There's also complex regional alliances with the US and Turkey, of course, Turkey not being very involved in this, and then Israel as well. So there's complex reasons as to why these nations might be apathetic or not address it. But I know that the Vatican was an issue with a lot of my Catholic friends, that many Armenian Catholic friends of mine were struggling with.
Well, I should mention that there is a deep friendship and respect for Pope Francis among the Armenians. As you said, the Pope visited Armenia in 2016. He recognized the Armenian genocide, for which he got a lot of, lash from Turkey and Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan's what is become to be known as the caviar diplomacy extends to everywhere. They're trying to disrupt this maybe tie between Armenians and the Vatican. Their extravagant donations, fake conferences, as the most recent one, the conference kind of titled Christianity in Azerbaijan, that talked about the Caucasian Albanians. These things, of course, are disturbing, but it seemed that Azerbaijan had rented a hall at the Vatican and made it look like it was a kind of a Vatican-sponsored event or organized by the Vatican when it was not. And of course, yes, the Vatican could have refused to rent the room, considering the title and the topic, but it looks like, bribery seems to be a national sport for Azerbaijan, so it's common. But I think, the Pope, we have to remember that his acceptance and recognition of the Armenian genocide, his canonization of a few Armenian into the sainthood of the church, and the fact that he has continuously talked about Artsakh and the peace, and even at his last sermon on Easter, he did mention his wishes and prayers that a peaceful agreement will be established between Armenians and Azeris.
And the Pope has done great work in that as well. I think the delicacy of the recent controversy with Azerbaijan and the Vatican kind of highlights how delicate this geopolitical kind of conflict is. What are some through lines you mentioned with persecution and how there are many commonalities, and also that, Islamic extremism or Turkish like national ideology plays a role? Is there any parallels in the rhetoric on the part of the agitators in these conflicts when it comes to Christian persecution? Is there similar through lines in Azerbaijan and in Nigeria and with the Yazidis?
Well, it seems like human rights violations, genocide, ethnocide are becoming, unfortunately, the norm in our kind of a world of conflict-ridden world. There are major powers who are basically corrupt, autocratic. They continue to oppress with impunity as long as world powers stand by. There's no punishment, there's nothing to pay for their crimes. So laws and courts, rule of law, are challenged. So just like the ISIS kind of unleashing a genocide against Yazidi population, they haven't been punished. They haven't been brought to court. There's no ISIS price that has been paid. And there's still close to 3,000 Yazidi women who remain as sex slaves. So when we talk about these things, we see parallels are powers, state-run or, kind of state-sponsored groups are carrying out these ethnocides, genocides with no punishment, with no consequence. So it gives power to others, saying, well, just like Hitler said, who now remembers the Armenian genocide? That meant if people don't remember that, I can continue to do that. And although we keep talking about never, never again, never again, from our perspective, it seems it's again and again. Because until a real punishment is faced by the perpetrators, there's no reason why this cannot continue.
Right. With no deterrence and justice, they're incentivized to continue. Absolutely. Well, Jackie, thank you so much. This was so succinct. Could you point our audience to where they can watch the docuseries and the Faces of Persecution docuseries? Does it have its own kind of social media and website that the audience can follow?
Yes. If you go to Faces of Persecution, you can also contact me if, Jackie at globalcadence.org, facesofpersecution.org. You can see that our Genocide 2.0, which is the Artsakh episode, is soon to be released. Our 10 years on the Yazidi genocide was already released last October, on the 10th anniversary of the Yazidi genocide. It is now acquired by European networks. We have had over 100,000 global viewers. Our second episode, Genocide 2.0, Artsakh Ethnic Cleansing, will hopefully be released later this summer. And our third episode, Climate of Conflict, Nigeria's Burning Divide, is basically on the Nigerian farmers in northern part that are being persecuted by Fulani herders who have been radicalized as Islamists. And basically, each one, we are trying to hold a powerful government accountable for its crimes. We are trying to underscore that the Rome Statute criminalizes the intentional destruction of cultural property in international and non-international armed conflicts. We're also providing a platform for the victims, the forcibly displaced, those who survived atrocities, like the Yazidi women who tell their stories with great bravery because they still live in danger, or the Nigerian children who have been attacked, or the Artsakh mothers who have lost children. So we are trying to say these are the faces of the persecution. These are not just statistics. These are actual people with lives, with backgrounds, with histories, with families. And when their livelihood, their natural resources, their religious sites that anchor them are being destroyed and they're being driven from their ancestral lands, that there should be some accountability. And we reveal all this to the global viewers so that we are educating, we're informing, but we're also asking for take action. It's not just public awareness, but you need to take action. And in shedding light on these destructions, genocides, and ethnic cleansing sites, we're kind of expanding to a wider international stage, amplifying a broader global reach, hopefully, and generating meaningful international recognition and hopefully support for such victims and survivors, because we want to tell them you're not alone. We see you, we hear you, we know your stories, and we want to share those stories. So the more we share, the more there's global recognition, global awareness, because our media is not covering it. Our media gives snippets and then they're gone. So this is a way for global viewers to actually watch and learn and then be alarmed, see the systematic state-sponsored atrocities, so that when it happens, they recognize it. They don't say, what is that? Why are, Artsakh Armenians being starved for 10 months? Well, that's a stage of a genocide in process.
Absolutely. And we've been following that here at the Philos Project. Well, Jackie, thank you so much. I cannot wait to watch
Thank
the
you.
second episode. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dominique. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.